Welcome, Bharat. You asked for a philosopher's take on biology, and wow, did you give us some dense material to chew on?
Yeah.
We're diving into François Jacobs' The Logic of Life, a real heady exploration of how our understanding of heredity and the very essence of being alive has changed over centuries.
Not just a science book.
Yeah,
Jacob was a Nobel Prize-winning biologist, but
uh,
he takes us on this philosophical journey through intellectual history, showing how our very conception of life itself has transformed over time.
all right, so let's unpack this.
Okay.
Jacob starts way back, even before microscopes or the idea of DNA. What did the logic of life even mean back then?
Picture this, explaining a horse by its image on a coat of arms.
Huh,
That's how thinkers like Aldrovandus approached the natural world.
okay.
They saw a creature's essence as tied to symbolism, mythology, even its culinary uses. It's a worldview where understanding life meant weaving together a tapestry of knowledge that went way beyond just the physical.
So it's less about anatomy and more about a creature's place in the grand scheme of things, almost like a cosmic filing system.
Exactly. And this starts to shift with folks like Descartes and Newton, the rise of mechanistic thinking, the universe as a giant clockwork mechanism.
Yeah.
That totally revolutionized how we viewed life.
So we're trading magic for gears and levers. Does this mean we lose that sense of wonder and the bigger meaning of it all?
Not necessarily. It's more like a refocusing. The emphasis shifts to what we can observe and measure.
Okay.
This sets the stage for thinkers like Linnaeus and Tournefort and their obsession with taxonomy.
Ah, yes, the rise of classification, trying to bring order to the chaos of the natural world by grouping plants and animals based on shared characteristics.
Right, and while this was a huge leap forward, Jacob points out its limitations. It's like trying to understand a book by its cover art alone. You can create categories, but it doesn't tell you the story inside, does it?
It makes you wonder if they ever got frustrated. Like, come on, there's got to be more to life than just what we see on the surface.
Oh, absolutely. And that frustration, that yearning to understand the deeper processes of life, especially the mystery of generation,
Yeah.
how life creates more life, that's where things get really interesting.
Yeah, preformation, spontaneous generation, those were some wild theories they were grappling with back then.
Think about the philosophical implications. If everything comes from something that already resembles it,
Right.
how do we account for the emergence of new forms? Where does novelty come from? This is where the purely mechanistic view starts to break down, and we see the seeds of a new kind of logic taking root.
So what was the next big shift in thinking? How did they move beyond just classifying and start to understand the processes driving life?
The concept of organization emerges as a key theme in the 19th century thinkers like Bichat and Cuvier.
Okay.
They move beyond just looking at individual parts. They start to see the interconnectedness, how those parts work together to create a functioning whole.
So instead of just focusing on the instruments, we're starting to hear the symphony.
That's a great analogy. And this focus on organization sets the stage for a truly revolutionary idea that life isn't static.
Okay.
It evolves over time.
Hmm.
This is where figures like Lamarck and Darwin enter the picture, and time itself becomes a crucial element in understanding the logic of life.
Here's where things get really interesting. We're no longer just cataloging the world.
Right.
We're trying to understand how it got to be this way. It's like we've discovered the plot twists in the story of life.
Exactly. Lamarck proposed that organisms adapt to their environment, passing on acquired traits. Then Darwin comes along and refines this with his theory of natural selection, this constant interplay between variation and environmental pressure that shapes which traits get passed on.
Okay.
And what's fascinating from a philosophical perspective is how this introduces chance and randomness as key players in the grand scheme of things.
Okay, so we've gone from a world where everything had its predetermined place to one where chance plays a huge role.
Right.
That's got to mess with your sense of order. Darwin's tree of life, though, that image still suggests a kind of underlying connection, right?
It does, and it highlights another profound shift in thinking. The rise of the statistical revolution in the late 19th century thinkers like Boltzmann and Gibbs start applying statistical thinking to understand complex systems.
Hmm.
Suddenly, evolution isn't just about individual giraffes stretching their necks, it's about populations shifting over generations due to chance variations and the pressures of natural selection.
Okay, so even with randomness, there are still underlying patterns at play. Does that mean we can predict where evolution is headed?
That's a great question and one that continues to spark debate. But before we get there, there's another crucial piece of the puzzle that Jacob highlights: the emergence of genetics.
Mendel and his pea plants. Finally, we're starting to understand inheritance at its most fundamental level.
Exactly. But what's fascinating is that Mendel's work, while groundbreaking, was largely ignored for decades. It's a reminder that scientific progress isn't always linear. Sometimes the world just isn't ready for a new idea.
It makes you wonder how many other brilliant insights are just waiting to be rediscovered, right? So we've got this statistical view of evolution, and now the nuts and bolts of heredity with genetics. Where does that lead us in our quest to understand the logic of life?
That takes us right into the 20th century, the age of the molecule, the discovery of DNA, and the genetic code that's like cracking the code book of life itself.
Hold on, before we jump into DNA and molecules,
Okay.
let's take a breath and remind ourselves what Jacob's trying to do here.
Right.
We're not just looking at a timeline of scientific discoveries.
Yeah.
We're trying to understand how our philosophical understanding of life has changed.
Right.
So how does this discovery of DNA fit into that bigger picture?
It's a game changer because it finally reveals the physical mechanism underlying inheritance, the very foundation of the logic of life that Jacob is exploring. Think of it this way. If DNA is the language genes, are the sentences, the instructions for building and running a living organism.
Okay, I'm starting to see how this all connects. From mystical beliefs to the intricate dance of molecules, it's mind-blowing how far our understanding has come. But where do we go from here? Does this molecular view of life answer all the big questions?
That's where Jacob pushes us even further. He doesn't stop at the molecular level. He introduces this fascinating concept of integrons, systems of integrated systems.
All right, I'm going to need you to unpack that one for me. Integrons, huh? Sounds a bit like something out of science fiction.
Don't worry, it's not as complicated as it sounds. Just think about it.
Okay.
Just as molecules come together to form cells, cells form tissues, tissues form organs, and so on, all the way up to organisms and even ecosystems. These are all examples of integrons, layers of complexity built upon each other.
So it's about linking the molecular level to the bigger picture of life, even to things like human societies.
Exactly. And that's where Jacob takes us next. He challenges us to consider the interconnectedness of everything, to see the logic of life operating at all these different levels. It's about recognizing that the same principles that govern the behavior of molecules can also shed light on the dynamics of societies and even the evolution of ideas.
This is getting pretty philosophical. So what does this all mean? Where does Jacob leave us in our quest to understand life?
Well, he doesn't necessarily give us all the answers. In fact, he leaves us with a very provocative question.
Oh, do tell.
He asks, how far can biological explanations go in helping us understand human culture and society?
Whoa, that's deep.
It is, and it's a question that we'll be exploring in more detail in the next part of our deep dive.
All right, folks, buckle up. We're about to get even more philosophical.
Picking up where we left off, Jacob argues that human culture and societies are themselves integrons, a
Right.
level of organization built upon the biological,
Right.
but operating with its own unique logic.
Okay, so we're zooming out even further now, from molecules to cells to entire societies. But how do we apply this logic of life to something as complex as human culture? Are we saying there's some kind of DNA for civilization?
Not DNA exactly.
Okay.
But Jacob suggests that just as cells communicate and coordinate through chemical signals, human societies rely on codes language.
Right.
Laws, customs, even fashion. These codes act as the glue that holds these complex social structures together.
So these codes are like the instruction manual for how we interact and organize ourselves. Just as DNA provides the instructions for a cell.
Precisely. And just as genetic mutations can lead to variations in organisms,
Right.
changes in these cultural codes can lead to the evolution of societies. Think about how technology, for example, has dramatically transformed how we communicate and interact.
Right. From the printing press to the internet, these technological leaps have reshaped our world in profound ways. But are we saying that cultural evolution follows the same rules as biological evolution? Is it all just a matter of survival of the fittest ideas?
That's where things get more nuanced. Jacob highlights the importance of chance and historical contingency. The success or failure of a cultural idea can depend on a whole web of factors: political climate,
Yeah.
economic conditions, even individual personalities.
So it's not just about having the best idea. It's about having the right idea at the right time and in the right context.
Exactly. And this is where the logic of life, as applied to human society, encounters its limits. Biological systems operate under the relatively straightforward principles of chemistry and physics.
Yeah.
But human societies are driven by factors that go beyond the purely material.
Things like beliefs, values, ideologies, those aren't easily quantifiable, are they?
Not at all. And that's precisely why Jacob cautions against reducing the study of human societies to purely biological explanations. While our biological nature certainly influences who we are, it doesn't dictate the full complexity of our social and cultural creations.
So we can't just apply the same rules of natural selection to the evolution of ideas. A catchy song doesn't necessarily have higher survival value than a complex philosophical treatise.
Precisely. A song or a political idea might spread rapidly, not because it's inherently better, but because it resonates with people's emotions, beliefs, and aspirations.
Right.
These are factors that go beyond simple biological imperatives.
So where does that leave us? Are we saying that biology is irrelevant when it comes to understanding human culture?
Not at all. What Jacob is suggesting is a more nuanced approach.
Okay.
He sees biology as providing the foundation,
Right.
the raw material upon which human culture and society are built,
Uh-huh.
but he recognizes the emergence of new principles and forces that operate at these higher levels of organization.
Okay, so it's not about reducing everything to biology, but about understanding the interplay between our biological nature and the unique characteristics of our cultural and social worlds.
Exactly. And this raises some really important questions. For example, if we accept that human culture has its own logic,
Yeah?
how do we account for the diversity of cultures throughout history and around the world?
That's a big one. What makes some cultures thrive while others disappear? What are the forces that drive these cultural shifts? And can we even talk about progress when it comes to culture?
And thinking back to Darwin's Tree of Life,
Right.
can we apply a similar concept to understand the interconnectedness and evolution of different cultures? Is there a kind of cultural phylogeny that mirrors the branching patterns of biological evolution?
We've gone from coats of arms to genes to entire societies. This is getting mind-bogglingly complex.
It is, but that's the beauty of Jacob's work. He's not just giving us a history of science.
Right.
He's challenging us to think about life itself in all its glorious complexity.
All right, folks, we've covered a lot of ground here, but we're not done yet. There's one final piece of the puzzle that Jacob introduces.
Right.
Something that might just hold the key to understanding the logic of life in its fullest sense.
And that, my friend, is what we'll be exploring in the final part of our deep dive.
Stay tuned. All right, so we've explored how this logic of life shapes everything from tiny cells to entire societies. It's been quite a journey.
It has. And Jacob leaves us with one final, incredibly thought-provoking concept.
Okay.
The idea of the limits of biological explanation.
Wait, so after this whole deep dive, we're hitting a wall.
Not a wall, but a horizon.
Okay.
Jacob acknowledges that as we move up these layers of complexity from molecules to cells to organisms to societies,
Right.
new principles emerge that aren't fully captured by the laws of biology alone.
So what's missing? What lies beyond the reach of biology?
Well, think about it. Can we explain the beauty of a symphony or the moral implications of a political decision solely in terms of genes and proteins?
No, not really. There's something about human experience, about consciousness and meaning-making that seems to transcend the purely material. Like those things exist on a whole other plane.
Exactly. Jacob argues that while our biological nature provides the foundation,
Right.
it doesn't fully account for the richness and complexity of human culture ethics and creativity.
So where do we go from here? If biology can't explain everything, what tools do we need to understand these higher levels of human experience?
That's where things get really interesting. Jacob doesn't lay out a clear-cut answer, but
Yep.
he opens the door to a whole new realm of inquiry. He suggests we need to consider perspectives from fields like philosophy, history, anthropology, even art.
So it's not about abandoning science, but about expanding our toolkit, bringing in different ways of knowing and understanding the world.
Precisely. It's about recognizing that the logic of life isn't confined to the laboratory. It's woven into the very fabric of our existence, expressing itself in countless ways. From the intricate dance of molecules to the grand narratives we create about ourselves and the universe.
We've been looking at life through a microscope, and now Jacob's saying, hey, step back and take in the whole view.
And what a view it is, full of wonder, mystery, and endless possibilities.
It's almost poetic, isn't it? This quest to understand life is a journey that never truly ends.
It doesn't. And that's perhaps the most important takeaway from the logic of life. Jacob reminds us that science isn't about finding all the answers. It's about embracing the questions, the unknown, the ever-expanding horizon of knowledge.
It's about that childlike sense of awe and curiosity, the drive to keep exploring, keep questioning, keep searching for deeper meaning.
And it's a journey we all share, whether we're scientists, artists, philosophers, or simply curious individuals. We're all part of this grand experiment called life.
From mystical beliefs to the intricate dance of molecules, our deep dive through the logic of life has been quite a ride.
It has, and as Jacob so eloquently reminds us, the quest to understand life in all its complexity and wonder is never truly finished.
So keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep. Until next time, my brat.